Today on BRStv Investigates, how much sand do you really need for a 1-inch sand bed, and are the sand bed calculators close? Hi, I'm Randy with this Friday's BRStv Investigates, where we put popular reefing gear, theories, and methods to the test by experimenting on our own tanks so you don't have to experiment on yours. And in today's experiment, we take our 5 most popular sand substrates, both dry and wet, and find out how much is needed to create a 1-inch sand bed per square foot. In order to test the question, are online sand bed calculators reliable? Let's find out. In the last episode, we tested how much sand you really got, whether you bought 40 pounds of dry or 40 pounds of wet sand. And today we're taking that one step further to help you decide how much sand you need for your tank in the first place, which for me is important in 2 ways. 1, so I can plan out my tank costs before spending the money, and 2, so I can get the right amount of sand at once rather than multiple trips and purchases. With that in mind, there are several sand bed calculators out there that will do this math for you, but how reliable are they, and is one more accurate than the other? Here's how we approach today's sand bed depth test. In order to test this one, we took a Mr. Aqua 12 by 12 inch 7.5 gallon cube tank and marked it at 1 inch above the bottom of the tank on all 4 sides. We then took our 5 most popular sand substrates with the wet and dry versions of Carib Sea's special grade and Fiji Pink sands, as well as the Carib Sea Bahamas Oolite sand, and then leveled out each one into a 1-inch sand bed in our testing cube tank. After weighing each one and accounting for the dry tank weight, we developed an idea of how many pounds of sand per square foot you would need. In order to compare our results against a sand bed calculator, we searched for the most comprehensive calculator we could find, which offered more than just approximate pounds per cubic foot sand grain weight, and found this calculator from aquacalc.com that has nearly every available type of Carib Sea sand listed, along with its weight in grams per cubic centimeter. So with that, here's what we found. For today's results, we'll first look at the online sand bed calculator result for that type of sand at 1 inch, and then compare that to what we found in the testing lab. We'll note that we aren't looking for exact numbers here and weights because it's pretty unreasonable to think about precision when talking about single grains of sand. However, a difference of a few to 5 to 10 pounds to create your ideal sand bed may mean anywhere from $12 to $24 worth of additional sand that you might have to pick up to get there. Getting started with the Carib Sea special grade Arag-Alive wet sand for a 1-inch sand bed in a square foot, the calculator states that we would need about 7.08 pounds. When I tested in the lab using a freshly opened bag of damp special grade sand, I found that it took 7.13 pounds to create our 1-inch sand bed, so nearly exactly what the calculator recommended. However, in our last test, we found that there was a little over 20% less sand in wet bags versus dry. So in this case, while the calculator was right against the weight of a brand new bag of wet sand, we can't expect to accurately use the calculator to buy the right amount of sand unless you factor in about 20% more for water weight. Next up is the special grade dry sand, which the online calculator lists as the same grams per cubic centimeter as the special grade wet, meaning that again we would need 7.08 pounds to make our 1-inch sand bed. However, when I tested, I found that it took 6.79 pounds, again, not exact, but pretty darn close, and in this case, water isn't a factor, so I'd feel confident using the calculator's recommendation. For the Fiji Pink wet sand and dry sand, again, the calculator lists both as needing 7.5 pounds to make a 1-inch sand bed per square foot, and in our testing, we found that the wet bag of Fiji Pink sand also has about 20% less sand than a dry bag, in which case the calculator was very close to what we measured for wet Fiji Pink, coming in at 7.65 pounds. But again, I'd feel more confident if I factored out the water and went with a higher amount per square foot. The dry Fiji Pink, however, was a pound under the calculator recommendation of 7.5 pounds, where it only took us 6.53 pounds to make 1 inches deep. I would say that this isn't a game changer difference, but the finer grains do require slightly more than larger grains and should be a consideration for larger tanks with higher square footage to cover. We also tested our 5th most popular carob sea sand with the wet Bahamas Oolite fine grain sand, which is one of the finest sands listed in the online calculator at 1.54 grams per cubic centimeter, which calculated out to needing 8 pounds exactly to create a 1-inch sandbed per square foot area. However, in our lab testing, we found that it took 10.87 pounds to create that 1-inch sandbed. So it is a little over 2.5 pound difference, but a very fine grain of this type of sand lends itself to retaining more water than the larger sand grain types, and if we took the time to allow it to completely dry out, I would expect these numbers to be very similar, if not the same, which is why I'm rating today's question of are online sandbed calculators reliable a 6 out of 10 on the Reef certainty scale. The calculator is accurate enough to the number of pounds of sand, but I'd say it lacks a bit in accounting for what's actually in the bag. So at best, if I were calculating wet sand for my own tank, I'd increase the calculator's recommendation by 20% to be safe. After finding this online calculator from aquacalc.com that takes the guesswork out of how much the sand weighs by including the most popular options in there, I wouldn't hesitate to use this calculator or one like it when planning out my next sandbed, as well as using this live sand and wet sand playlist over here to find out how to add sand to your bare bottom tank or which goes first, sand or rock.